Again, my thanks to Henry and to Mabel for organizing the panel. It is very important that we keep mind of the critical role of people-to-people diplomacy in the bilateral relationship, both in science and technology and in education. The people-to-people part of that relationship has far outgrown what the government bilateral relationship even considered possible in the early years. And so, as everyone has suggested, we need not only government involvement, but we need the stakeholders from academia, from think tanks, from business involved in order to keep the relationship vibrant, alive, and hopefully growing in the years ahead. I'm going to talk about joint venture universities. Why? Because I spent 5 long years as the executive vice chancellor, and now I have I left in June of 2020. I was present on the campus when the decision was made in late January to evacuate the campus. And I've been, of course, watching at what has happened in terms of the return first of the Chinese students, then of the international faculty, and then the international students, which have unfortunately come back only in drips and drabs. But I think that if we step back for a moment and look at the idea of these joint venture universities, the first thing that we have to do is we have to give great credit to the Ministry of Education in China. In 2005, when the decision was made to inaugurate the first joint venture university, Ningbo and Nottingham, involving the UK University of Nottingham. This was really a remarkable decision. Most Western educators never thought they would see the day when such a kind of new venture would be accepted in China, particularly because of some critical issues in the management of these new ventures, and of course academic freedom being one of the most important. Today there are 10 official joint venture universities in China. That means 10 institutions that give dual degrees, a foreign degree and a Chinese degree. And among those 10, 4 involve U.S. institutions, NYU Shanghai, Duke Kunshan, Wenzhou Qin, and the latest is Juilliard, which is in Tianjin. And those are the 10. Now, there are some 2,300 joint venture projects in China, of which about 1,200 or so involve universities. And these involve things like, say, a single master's degree. So University of Michigan and Shanghai Jiao Tong University give a master's. Pittsburgh and Sichuan University have a joint degree. And of course, one of the earliest programs that was developed was the Johns Hopkins program with Nanjing University, which really was, at the frontier in those days, not only because of its structure, but more importantly, because of the topic. International relations and international affairs can involve some sensitive issues. Nonetheless, that campus has thrived. It has had some bumps along the way, as its participants will tell you, but many of the people today that serve in the U.S. Embassy in China or the Chinese Embassy in Washington actually were trained at the Hopkins campus in Nanjing. Now, what's interesting about these joint venture universities is that they have been the product of a time and a situation that as of 2022 and we're turning into 2023 may no longer be present. One of the motive drivers of this was the spread of globalization, the lowering of borders, which allowed faculty, students, a lot of mobility has been involved in making these things possible. And as we know, we're talking today about words like fractured globalization or even deglobalization. And so some of that, some of that motive force is no longer there. The same thing with campus internationalization. In the United States, I know David works with all of the senior international officers, and at many campuses, there is a hesitancy to return back to the so-called pre-COVID period because of concerns expressed by the US government. And so one wonders whether or not that motive force of internationalization will still be there. Now, on the Chinese side, that's very, very strong. Most people don't realize there are close to 500,000 international students studying at Chinese universities. That's a big number. Now, in terms of joint venture universities, the total number of students involved in these projects, the Chinese data suggests is over 300,000 international students who are involved in some kind of joint venture project. But in terms of these campuses, the largest ones are the ones involving the two UK universities, Ningbo and Nottingham, and Xi'an, Liverpool, out in Suzhou. Now, the thing that we have to remember about joint venture universities is that they're not easy to manage. They're very complex, they're very difficult. There's a number of operational issues that get involved, operational issues that have to do with the fact that the joint venture is a legal Chinese entity and that the chancellor must be a Chinese citizen. And so that puts a number of constraints in terms of bringing over through technology transfer or knowledge transfer, things like the liberal arts model of education. And Duke Kunshan, NYU Shanghai, for example, are two examples of universities that have made strong commitments to liberal arts and yet have found it increasingly difficult to continue moving forward. STEM education, no problem. But liberal arts education, particularly involving humanities and social sciences, a little bit more difficult to put in place. The Chinese side has liked the joint venture universities because they serve as a talent magnet for bringing over faculty to these institutions. DKU, for example, has faculty from 14, 15 different countries from around the world. Not that many are from within China, but many are from the United States and Europe, and they bring with them, their pedagogical methodology, which is very much, the kind of give and take in the classroom. And they ask students a question that most Chinese tell us they've never been asked. What do you think? No one has ever asked them what they think. And the pedagogical model that's been brought to DKU, NYU, et cetera, really thrives because it tries to get Chinese students in particular to think about how they make an argument, how they basically develop an opinion, and how they can marshal facts and information to make a point in a discussion without simply repeating what some professor or faculty member has told them. The operational issues that are involved are not only on the Chinese side. It's important to realize they also come from the foreign side. The home university like Duke or NYU, et cetera, there's not always a solid group of people who are in support of using campus resources to support these initiatives. The idea, of course, is that American universities, according to some people in the US Congress, are selling out their core values for a big payday. But I can assure you, these universities do not make a lot of money. In fact, it's just the opposite. Most of them run in a high deficit mode. This is elite education at its finest. And in many cases, it's a very expensive proposition to deliver this kind of education to the students. Now, in addition to the kinds of things I've talked about, of course, no one could have anticipated that it was going to be a pandemic and that the international students in particular, which in NYU's case is 50% of the student body, and DKU, it's somewhere between 35 to 40% of the student body, that they would be scattered to all corners of the earth. And in about 12 or 13 weeks after the COVID pandemic struck at the end of January, they are already engaged in online education, except for the fact with students from 41 different countries at DKU, you had tremendous problems of delivering the programs because of different internet connectivity, different time zones, different living situations, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, no one also could have envisioned in 2013, when DKU was founded, that Sino-U.S. relations would take a turn for the worse and end up in a very sour state, as we were referred to during this panel. And the state of the relationship has affected joint venture universities in many, many different kinds of ways. And it just made it a little bit more difficult to operate. And of course, changing circumstances within China as well have also made it difficult to operate. Particularly, again, that issue of academic freedom rears its head and makes it difficult on certain occasions to proceed ahead with the pedagogical model. What everyone doesn't understand, what most people don't understand, and I think this is a really important point, is that the issue of academic freedom is not a political one. The issue of academic freedom is all about accreditation. In order for the degree to remain accredited, in order for the degree to be allowed to approved by, in our case, the Southern States Association that accredits the degree, the equivalent pedagogical environment must exist in the overseas location. And there are review teams sent periodically out to DKU, as they are for NYU and as they are for Wenzhou Qing, to ensure that, in fact, that the quality of the education is not Duke Light or Duke B or some, lower variation of what Duke offers back in Durham. It has to be equivalent because the students who graduate get a Duke degree. So this is all not about a political perspective. It is about an educational quality issue that comes up to help us maintain. So where is this thing going now in the future? It's going to be hard to get students back. The good news, and I think this is reflected in Peggy's data, is that the number of applicants coming from Chinese students to joint venture universities like DKU and NYU has increased substantially. Many parents like the idea of their kids getting a US style or UK education, but not having to leave the safety of their country. And I think that that accounts for the numbers going up on the Chinese side. Similarly, for international students, very surprisingly, I don't have the data for this past year, but up to last year, the numbers of international students wanting to come to DKU is also on the rise, and that was true for NYU, Ningbo and Nottingham, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, many Chinese students today at Ningbo and Nottingham, I know personally, have now decided to get their master's degree in China at places like these JV universities rather than going abroad. So that also is something that we need to consider. Let me close by just with a quote from President Vincent Price. President Price was giving a speech in China, and he said, DKU is a shining light on the hill in the midst of the turbulence of US-China relations. And that exactly describes where we are. What was once thought going to be perhaps a slam dunk, or at least not such a major challenge, I can tell you from year one, when I got there in 2015 to when I left in June of 2020, things got increasingly difficult. Nonetheless, I would argue, and I think we heard this from everyone on this panel so far, and I'm guessing we're going to hear it from Madeline as well. These kind of experimental ventures are so important because they bring the young people of both countries together in a learning environment in which they can begin to understand how each other thinks. They can understand the culture of the other country, and they can begin to work together collaboratively so that 10, 20, 30 years later in their careers, when they meet each other on the battlefield of business or foreign policy or whatever it may be, they can have a better understanding how to talk to one another, how to interact with one another, and hopefully work together. So despite, some of the challenges and the hurdles, I think that, and I hope that we will start to see more interest return in these JV universities, but it will take, again, a big push on the Chinese side and the US side to make these happen. Thank you very much.